Donald Trump asked the Ukrainian president to look into Joe Biden's dealings over there from years back. But what really happened in Ukraine? We'll take a look. For months, people are going to be debating that phone call that Donald Trump made. Did he ask the question right? Did he put too much pressure on Ukraine? What's Rudy Giuliani doing on this? But a fundamental question is, what happened in the Ukraine with Vice President Biden and his son and this company? Because not a whole lot of people are reporting on that. At the essence, it revolves around Joe Biden pressuring that country to fire their top prosecutor. We all know that basic thing, but from that, two narratives come out. On one, the Democrats and most of the mainstream media, their narrative is that Joe Biden was serving U.S. national interests, that he was doing his best to root corruption out of Ukraine, and this was a good and great thing for him to do, and that Donald Trump pulling him into this stuff is somehow unethical and wrong. The anti-Biden narrative is that he pushed out a prosecutor who was looking into a company called Burisma, a pretty shady natural gas company, and who sat on Burisma's board of directors? Joe Biden's son, Hunter. To a lot of people, that looks like something that's pretty bad. I'll give away the ending here. There's really no clear-cut answers. The mainstream media is pushing this narrative that this is a complete conspiracy theory. In fact, they use the phrase conspiracy theory in a lot of articles, or that this is completely debunked, or that there's no evidence. There is some evidence of some shady stuff going on. On the other hand, the conservative media is really not any better. They're saying that it's clear that Joe Biden was doing something unethical. And I'll be honest, at the end of the day, you can't prove that either. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to first lay out the undisputed facts, and then let's look at the positive and negative case towards Vice President Biden. I guarantee at the end of this, you will know more than 99% of Americans about what really happened in Ukraine. So here's what we know. Joe Biden actually has a pretty good reputation as an ethical politician, or at least as good as a politician can be. In 2014, Ukraine, a country that most Americans couldn't find on a map, has a revolution. At that point, Obama sends Joe Biden to be our point person into Ukraine to help both fix the country, keep the Russians at bay, and the biggest problem that Ukraine really had was endemic corruption. It's not too much to say that Joe Biden was the most important American in Ukraine for many years. He said he visited around a dozen times, and it became his project. His son, Hunter Biden, though, doesn't share that same ethical reputation. On a professional level, Hunter Biden never seemed to be all that far away from his dad's political world. His first job was working for one of his dad's largest contributors. He worked in the Clinton White House. Then it got a little bit kind of more iffy. He became a lobbyist, totally fine to do. But then when his dad became active in China as Vice President of the United States, Hunter Biden joined up with the Secretary of State's son and said, hey, let's go raise money in China from basically the Chinese government. He accepted a 2.8 carat diamond one time as a gift from a Chinese guy who was trying to get influence in the United States government. And just a few months after his dad became so important in Ukraine, Hunter Biden started doing business there as well, even though he had no experience there in the country and he had no real experience in natural gas or energy. Hunter's personal life was even more of a mess. He'd fought alcohol and drugs most of his life. He had strings pulled to get him into the Naval Reserve when he was in his 40s. He literally showed up for his first day on the Naval Reserve with coke in his system and blamed somebody giving him a cigarette at a bar the night before. Hunter's talked about his struggles with alcohol and crack cocaine, which were pretty bad. While his dad was Vice President of the United States, Hunter was buying drugs from homeless people in Los Angeles. He crashes a car from Hertz and then returns the replacement car with a crack pipe with some drugs, his ID, and a Secret Service business card in it. His personal problems at home were bad too. He had a very ugly divorce. He had a well-known affair with his dead brother's widow. He had a homeless woman living in his house for a while, and this current wife he'd married after knowing for only a few weeks. Those things don't say he's an unethical person in business, but they do lead to questions about his judgment. If you want to learn more about Hunter, I've done a whole video just on him and the things that the press really hasn't reported that much. I tell you, it's kind of a crazy story. Also, don't forget to subscribe to us if you want to see more stories like this. So just a few months after the Ukrainian Revolution, Hunter and his business partner, Devin Archer, joined the board of a company called Burisma. Now, Burisma has a very interesting story and colorful characters of its own. So Burisma was founded by a guy named Mykola Zlochevsky. Now, he was a former minister of ecology in Ukraine, and he gave natural gas drilling rights to companies that he owned. He owned them secretly and had them incorporated in Cyprus. becoming a multi-millionaire in the process. The new regime comes in and Burisma is like, look, we got problems here. So they start to hire Americans. They start to hire some well-known people for their board of directors to basically come up with a legal and a PR defense against what they know is coming. The company brings in Biden, his partner, a U.S. law firm, and a public affairs company called Blue Star Strategies that had some pretty good Democratic connections. Within about a year, Zlochevsky actually fled Ukraine, and he was gone for a number of years until he was allowed to come back. It's a shady company. At that point, a man named Viktor Shokin becomes the country's top cop. The official position is Prosecutor General, which is similar to the United States Attorney General, appointed by the president to a 6-year term. These guys are never all that popular in Ukraine. In fact, since it became an official country in 1991, not one single one of these men has served the full 6 years of their term. They're usually in for a few years and tossed out, and it's always a little weird. Still, Shokin was really unpopular, both within Ukraine and from other countries as well, who said that he didn't take corruption all that seriously. He was stalled on some investigations, and in fact, a couple of his deputies were found with stashes of diamonds and cash inside of their houses. In 2015, Joe Biden basically strong-armed Ukraine into getting rid of Shokin. Here's him in his own words.
I looked, I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired.
It took 3 months, but eventually Shokin was fired. And to this day, the question is, did Joe Biden do a good thing for Ukraine by helping him reduce corruption, or was that act somewhat corrupt? Here's where it gets tricky, because everyone involved in this whole mess has a reason to lie if they're guilty. From Joe Biden saying certain things to every single one of these prosecutors who has also had charges against them. You just kind of have a hard time understanding who's telling the truth and who's not, and especially because some of these prosecutors literally have changed their tunes over the years. So first, let me take Joe Biden's side on this. Look, the very first thing to make clear is even if you're a politician, you're still presumed innocent until you're proven guilty. And there is no clear proof or even substantive proof that says Joe Biden did something unethical to help his kid. There's a little bit of smoke and mirrors around here, but he's still innocent unless we have a reason to believe otherwise. To be clear, the firing of Shokin was actually popular both in Ukraine and within other governments around, including the United States, including the European Union. Joe Biden wasn't freelancing. This was something that a lot of people in the world wanted to have happen. Also, others have said that there was no active investigation of Burisma going on when the prosecutor was fired. In fact, one of his former deputies came out and said, no, that just wasn't happening. Now, this prosecutor was also accused of wrongdoing and of corruption. And again, everybody there seems like they've been accused of that. Even the anti-corruption groups that are public often get accused of being corrupt. You kind of don't know who's who sometimes. And recently, Yuri Lysenko, the top prosecutor who came in after Shokin, said that Biden did nothing wrong by Ukrainian law. That said, it wasn't all that long ago that this same prosecutor was telling Rudy Giuliani, according to the Washington Post, that the Bidens had done something wrong. So which prosecutor's statement do you believe? The one he told a year ago or the one that he told just recently? Makes things a little muddy. If you support Biden, you can actually make a pretty good argument that by getting rid of this soft prosecutor, assuming that that was the case, and most people think it was, that he was actually harming his son's interests. The flip side to that is, after that prosecutor was fired, basically very little ended up happening to Burisma in any event. They eventually had to pay $7 million in back taxes to Ukraine, but there was never a prosecution. The guy who gave himself his own contracts got to come back to the country, and Burisma's doing fine and never had any serious legal trouble in Ukraine. That said, there are some serious questions to have, not only about the situation, but about Joe Biden's behavior in Ukraine. The first is that the fired prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, publicly said in court documents that he was fired because he was being told to back off of Burisma, and he pointed his finger right at Joe Biden. That's in court records. On the other hand, he's got every reason to lie and to save his reputation. Do you completely discount that, or do you look into it closer? As I mentioned before, even the prosecutor who came in after this guy also told Rudy Giuliani that Biden had done some nefarious things in there. No idea of what kind of proof that they have or anything like that, and now that guy's changed his tune. But again, do you believe the first allegations or the second allegations? And then in a kind of bizarre move, literally days after that Shokin was fired, Burisma sent some Americans over across the seas to meet with the interim prosecutor. They sent their lawyer and a PR team who came to Ukraine, And this prosecutor wrote a memo to the files which says, in part, the purpose of their visit was an apology for the dissemination of false information by U.S. representatives and public figures on the activities of the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine regard to the criminal activities of this firm. That leaves the implication that at least some of the charges against Shokin were made up, possibly in a PR effort to get rid of him, but it also raises a lot of questions. And then there's Biden's recent statement that he had no knowledge of his son's business activities.
Have you ever spoken to your son about his overseas business dealings?
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings.
The problem is that's contradicted by his son himself, who gave an interview with the New Yorker magazine where he said that, yes, he actually did talk to his dad, who was like, hey, do you know what you're doing in this case? Also raising questions if Biden ever talked to his son about this is this photo that the Trump campaign has been pushing around showing him playing golf with his son and his son's business partner, Devon Archer, both of whom were on the board of Burisma. In fact, Archer had also had a private meeting with Vice President Biden just a few days before Archer took the position on the board of Burisma, and just a few days before Biden ended up going to the country for another round of meetings. Those raise some interesting questions. Look, when Joe Biden started becoming active in China, his son started doing business in China. When he started becoming active in Ukraine, his son started doing business in Ukraine, making possibly millions of dollars from this, although the records are kind of murky and they're not publicly available. Joe Biden knew his son was doing weird stuff with a nefarious company that was under investigation. He surely knew his son was making some big bucks from this shady company, and he shouldn't be all that surprised now when people are asking questions about it. So where does that leave us? Look, there's clearly not enough evidence to show Joe Biden did anything illegal. Certainly, you should raise your eyebrows at the whole kind of weird situation that was going on there, but that's not illegal. Might be wrong, but not necessarily illegal. On the other hand, the press portraying this as some conspiracy theory or Trump making up things and there's nothing here, that's just not true. And if you read that in a news article, no, you're being spun by somebody who is on one side and is so anti-Trump that they're not giving you the truth. And we may learn more. Ukraine's new top prosecutor just said that they'd audit some of the investigations that they had to see if they were improperly closed. Look, if you think this was a fair and smart report, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and if you get a chance, check out LaCorte News for more news unspun. Till next time.